Hey everybody, welcome back to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock, and this is a special edition of our podcast. It's the third in a series of 4. These are my conversations from the NoCo Hemp Expo that took place in Denver, Colorado just a couple of weeks ago at the end of March 2022. Today we're going to hear my conversation with Maren Krings. She is a photographer and a writer. She calls herself a climate impact storyteller. She's traveled all over the world to see how various people and cultures utilize the hemp plant. And she's just published a book. It's called H is for Hemp, which you're going to want to get a copy of. I'll have details for you on how to do that at the end of the interview. But for now, let's just get into my conversation with Maren Krings, author of H is for Hemp. Maren Krings, welcome to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast at the NoCo Hemp Expo. How are you doing?
Fine. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the conversation.
Yeah. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Maren Krings. I'm a German climate impact storyteller, photographer, author, and yeah.
And you've just published your 4th book?
That is my 4th book right here, The H is for Hemp.
H is for Hemp.
It is printed on exclusively made hemp paper from a German paper company, Hanemühle. And I would say the hemp paper in this was probably a journey in itself because it took about 2 years to develop.
Okay. And it's a sizable book. How many pages is that?
The book has 624 pages. It has a pretty small format for being a photography book, and but it was necessary because there's a lot of writing in there. There's also, we wanted to keep it in the format of an encyclopedia, so it's really, you can start at any chapter without having to have read the one previous or afterwards. It's all sort of separate little stories in itself.
Oh, great. Okay. So as a climate impact journalist, did you initially start out this journey about hemp, or how did you get into this?
I didn't. I certainly didn't. I would have not even dared to call myself a climate impact storyteller at the beginning of this journey. I had just finished my 3rd book on the Alps, and I was kind of at that point where I just wanted to get out. It was start of 2016. The refugee crisis in Europe was really at its height. And, all these very polarizing voices then already encouraged me to say, okay, maybe it's time to set out on Europe and understand a bit more what our borders are, how different the countries are. The refugee crisis really showed me how little I know my own homelands. I mean, of course, France is not Germany, Austria is not Switzerland, but it's all so close. I mean, it all fits into the United States, and I just felt there's a necessity to understand better by going out and seeing what's really happening. And for some reason, that journey got torpedized by that hemp plant, because I just, literally the first story I did in Italy, a couple of weeks after moving into my car and deciding I was going to live in my car, make that my mobile home and office, and start driving through Europe, I was commissioned for a magazine to make a documentary or a reportage about the traditional wheat cutting in Italy. And then I met this hemp farmer. And when he introduced himself as a hemp farmer, in fact, I misunderstood. I thought, this guy's telling me at 6 o'clock in the morning in front of the church tower that he's a drug dealer. Because I was completely unenlightened about industrial hemp. And this is where my journey started. Then he gave me a pep talk on all the positive, hemp's potential in total. I decided that can't be true because I had never heard about any of this before, and then kind of, brushed it off, continued the journey, and found hemp, and found hemp, and found hemp. And eventually, after half a year, I don't know if I was really frustrated, but anyhow, I just decided, okay, that's it. This plant keeps crossing any path, anything I touch, it's at the end it's hemp. So I decided to actually fully dedicate my time to documenting hemp and really researching also this whole industrial rediscovery of, get a word twister in here, the rediscovery of industrial hemp. And also the interesting thing was how that was so differently applied whether you are in Sweden or in Italy or in Slovenia or in France. In the beginning, I traveled mainly in, the vast lands of Central Europe, but then pretty quickly also branched out up north to Scandinavia, completely changed landscape on hemp. Went down to Morocco, to Turkey, and then went to Asia, to China and Mongolia.
And you can just drive there, huh?
I didn't drive everywhere. So China, I definitely did on an airplane because it would have just not worked on the landway. Mongolia, I was already in my hardcore footsteps where I said, this is it. I need to be more truthful on the journey. I need to cut my own emissions and be honest. So the car was great because I lived in this car. So in the winter, there was no heating. I didn't have electricity. I didn't have water. So it was complete off-grid living, which wasn't always easy, but it certainly made you downscale your lifestyle. And I would never drive anything twice because I didn't have that going somewhere and coming back home. I would go and then continue. And Mongolia, I did on train. So I basically left from Europe and then went all the way through Russia into Mongolia. I tried to do as much with train if I couldn't do it by car. And
how did you find the various hemp growers or projects around, especially like Asia and these far-flung places?
All about network. And I'm having a whole chapter dedicated to the networks because the importance of networks, you cannot underestimate that. So basically what happened is Werner Schönthaler, this Italian guy I mistook for a drug dealer who became a very close friend of mine, he started me out on giving me his network within South Tyrol, then Italy, then some was Switzerland. So it was kind of, stuck in that alpine circle going from A to B and checking out all of these people. But the thing is, as soon as you met somebody else from his network, they would provide you their network, and then they would tell you in a conversation about this, that, and the other, and I'd basically always pick out the most interesting sounding things, and I'd say, can you connect me to them? Or I'd Google. Sometimes it was the weird leads that you get when you're starting to research on a topic, and then you get person A, B, C, and while you're trying to figure out who person D is, you find person F, and sometimes it was extremely random. Definitely places like NoCo, IHA, sort of these big hemp hub associations that really bring the industry together on a more global level. I mean, the Industrial Hemp Association, IHA in Europe, their yearly conference, when it was still in person, the Chinese came, the Japanese came, the African people came. So that was literally my meeting spot. I would go there and then already had lined up sort of my connector people. And I remember IHA 2018, that was in June. I went there with the prospects of meeting the Chinese producer for hemp textiles, who the German producer of hemp textiles works together with. And the German one was sort of one of my early mentors, who really helped me out understanding the whole scene. And that's Robert Hattel. And Robert just called me. He's like, if you want to go to China and figure out how textile works in China, you come to the IHA, I will set you on the table, and then you go to China. And that's literally what happened.
That's amazing. So can you talk about just, a few examples of people you met or how different cultures are using hemp differently? Certainly.
Turkey was quite interesting. Turkey is basically one of the last European, I always consider there's the geographical Europe, which Turkey certainly belongs to, and then there's the political Europe, which it doesn't. But if we're talking about the geographical Europe, then Turkey is literally the only country, with Romania, that really still has the textile, I would say, capabilities, because
infrastructure is still there.
Not necessarily the infrastructure. I mean, Romania on that point is definitely leading. I mean, this is all Romanian hemp, and they still have the what are they called, the textile, where they were weaving it.
The spinners and all
spinners.
Things,
I can't think of the.
I'm sure there's a better word.
Yeah. I can't think
but
of
the
it right now,
processing machines, the looms and all
the
of that.
Looms, that's where I was, the looms and the processing machines for the textile. It's there, a lot got destroyed. but the little that's left, they're trying to enact it in life, and right now. So there's a lot happening there, and Turkey, for example, still has that ability of, they do everything hemp by hand. So they're planting their hemp by hand, they're harvesting it by hand. They have these over 8 meter high hemp plants for fiber, which is incredible. They literally rip every single hemp plant out by hand, making sure the stem stays unbroken. And that's exactly what our modern industry with the machines can't handle, because the fiber's too long. It's they don't know how to decorticate it from stem, fiber, chives. Then the whole degumming process is still either involving too many chemicals or the fibers are too small. So there's a lot of these problems still. Turkey doesn't have them because they're still doing so much hand-derived. Of course, that doesn't go into a scaled-up industry. But, we always talk about we have lost the old and ancient knowledge of how to do these things. And it certainly is still there in Turkey. Yeah. And the industry that's starting to build up in Turkey now, which is definitely a scaled industry to size, is obviously profiting because they know how it's done manually. When you know how something is done manually correct, then it's always easier to find or to invent the right machine to do it mechanically or industrially. But you simply can't do that if you already don't know how to separate herd, bast, and fiber.
How about Mongolia? Can you talk about your travels to Mongolia?
I can do that. Mongolia was a big challenge. It was also one of these chapters that sort of went a little bit beyond that classical, industrial hemp application. There are plentiful of reasons why Mongolia needs to apply industrial hemp to their overall political, social, climatic landscape, because they have just a never-ending list of problems with air pollution, political voice, when you're talking about corruption and everything. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on where hemp could really break some grounds. I mean, if they were to be able to use hempcrete for the building material, have better insulated houses, Mongolia gets extremely cold, down to minus 40 degrees in the winter, and that's Celsius. So that's
very cold.
Yeah, very, very cold. Yeah, if you live in a yurt in the Gare and you can only heat with raw coal, I mean, these people literally in the winter start throwing anything on their fires just to stay warm. If it's old car tires, it doesn't matter, but it certainly doesn't help the overall air pollution that's happening. And the child death rate in the capital, in Ulaanbaatar, is way beyond skyrocketing when it comes down to just the air pollution topic. And my quest was actually to see how was hemp cannabis in this sense. That was not just the industrial, or not at all actually the industrial, because cannabis grows wild in Mongolia. Right. So I wanted to know, how was this interconnected to the whole shamanism, to these cultural events, to the cultural build-up, because I knew very little of it. So I went to Mongolia. We traveled thousands of kilometers to fully unknown places. I didn't know where we were anymore because we didn't have a map, we didn't have a navigation. We would stop and ask the nomads to roughly where we needed to go until we met the shaman and had the shamanic ceremony. And it's a difficult chapter because it is illegal, 100%. Oh, so okay. There were a lot of restraints of what I could show from the story, what I could not show from the story. So there's also the book now in its finished stage doesn't show it, but trust me, there were more than one chapter where we had really, really hard discussions, and also a lot of maneuvering to make sure that our characters, our subjects, stay safe, that they're not losing their identity, not getting into political trouble because they told me their story and I'm exposing the story and I'm making them unsafe. So there's...
That's your discretion as a journalist. That's sort of a sacred duty that you have as a storyteller.
Exactly. I would say more as a storyteller, because as a journalist it becomes... the journalistic truth you may also not touch, and I think this is where the work actually does become an artwork, because I did choose every now and then to leave names out, to alter stories, not the content in terms of its
intrinsic truth.
I didn't make it untruthful. I just chose to maybe not cast complete light on every part of the set to keep people safe. So it's we will see. If there will be a volume 2, some of these stories might be able to be told in full length, because by that time the world hopefully has changed and these people will be granted that they are secure, even if they are involved with cannabis and hemp and everything.
Yeah.
So, but it became very political, especially in that end phase.
Yeah, right. I saw you speak yesterday at one of the NoCo panels, and so just remembering something I heard you speak about. Can you explain how lichens and reindeer have to do with hemp?
Absolutely. Well, lichens and reindeer, to the first viewpoint, probably don't have much to do with hemp, but I was really blessed when I was invited by the Sami indigenous people of the north. The Sami are our last European indigenous peoples, and they populate the northern plains of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and also Russia. And on several occasions had I met Sami people, worked with them, and just always been so enlightened by the knowledge that they've been passing on. You know, the traditional ecological knowledge that's based on thousands of years of living in sync with Mother Nature. It's something that we just simply don't really handle in our modern cultures. And reindeer feed off lichens, so that's a standing fact. These lichens grow on trees that are really old. So basically a plantation tree, a monoculture, forest, as the northern plains are starting to be populated by for the forest industries, there's no lichens on there.
Because they just won't grow because they're not old enough.
Exactly. Like a really biodiversity valuable tree must be around 650 years plus. This is a very, very large time span that, you know, totally no one in our modern society makes any decisions based on not even 100 years ahead.
Right. Yeah, we can't seem to think in those long terms.
No.
Everything is short-term profits.
Exactly.
Here's the world we're in right now.
Yeah. And the most indigenous cultures actually hold that belief that, you know, no decision is being made unless we consider 7 generations from now, which is, I'm making a bit of rough math here when I say 700 years, but basically based upon, you know, 600, 650, 700 years ahead of us. And that's a really long time frame. So obviously decisions are made completely differently. Now, with the modern paper industry in Scandinavia, we are having the problem that, you know, they're clear-cutting a lot of these old-growth forests, which means those forests that remain, that have lichen growing, are becoming too little to feed all the reindeer during the wintertime. Also, they're not connected to each other anymore, which means reindeer now have to start crossing really, really busy traffic roads, and they get killed. So there's a ton of, you know, adjacent problems coming in. We have a globally warming climate, which means that even up north above the Arctic Circle, rain is now falling in the middle of the winter time, laying flat layers of ice within the snow, which then again prevents the reindeer from being able to smell the lichen underneath the ice. So they might be treading for days on their food, but they don't know it's there, so they're starving. There's a lot of, you know, so basically what I'm trying to say is Sami indigenous livelihood is 100% interconnected to an intact biodiversity, to the presence of these old growth boreal forests, and of course to the reindeer. Now, the question is, if our paper industries were to not touch these old growth forests anymore, which definitely needs to happen, where do they get their raw material from? And this is where it starts connecting to hemp. And that was one of these things that I started realizing when I was up there, that we really need to find solutions, because we can't continue to go about plowing down all these old growth forests and then saying, we're deforestating them. Well, yes, with a plantation forest that no reindeer is ever going to set foot on, not for the next 700 years, unless, these trees keep growing and growing and growing and get into a natural ecosystem and start having lichen on them again. And that was really my big pet peeve and my huge motivator to say, I don't care what it's going to cost. I don't care how much energy I'm going to have to put into it, but my book will be printed on hemp paper. I have to walk the talk or walk the walk. If I'm talking about sustainability, and I'm doing that in every single chapter of this book, and then I'm going to write into the imprint that, oh, sorry, this is the 100th and whatever book that failed to be printed on hemp paper because I couldn't get my hands on it. It was too expensive. That's what a lot of the hemp books actually have standing in their imprint. And I said that then it's going to be an unpublished book if that will happen. So I really set my mind on it, and I fought a lot for making it happen. It was not an easy journey. It was also very difficult in the end because it came down to, financial issues. The paper is very expensive, much above any of the other papers, but also obviously has to do with the supply chain. We don't have enough demand for hemp paper, hence we don't have enough people producing it. We still are lacking the amounts of biomass being produced on industrial hemp in Europe, in America, everywhere. And so it's, I guess on that sense, I definitely entered into the hemp industry by experiencing all these troubles that come when you're trying to do something with hemp, where now I can say, yes, that's true, but we need to overcome that. And that's why the hemp community really needs to bundle up and join forces, because if everybody keeps inventing and designing their own thing for maybe personal prestige, then we're certainly not getting ahead as quick as we need to be in a climate crisis.
What lessons from your travels and your writing of the book could you share with the U.S. hemp industry? What could they stand to learn from the work that you've done?
Wow, that's a big question. I always try to stay away from trying to tell other people what they need to be learning from me, because
maybe what they should learn, but what lessons? What do you see when you look at the American hemp industry that, are there some dangers that you would warn against, or?
I think there's something about enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is pretty good. We need to have it to get a jump start at something. But if there's too much enthusiasm involved, then we also tend to stop acting and just continue talking, because it's just too easy and too nice to be talking away about all the possibilities hemp. And I see that very clearly here at NoCo also when you listen to literally any of the panels, that usually the European voices are they become a bit sarcastic, they become a bit more grounded. They usually say, wait, before we go into the big woo-hoo cheerleading, let's just talk about the problems here, okay? Let's make that clear. This is not an easy journey. It is a painful journey, and if you want to be on it, then do it, but do it right. And I think as everything culturally, I think that the good and balanced mix between the European side and the American side would probably amount into the most potential for industrial hemp to really get a head start. Because in Europe we tend to be a bit very pessimistic at times, which we think things through way too long. Before we really get into action, we've shoveled that stuff from left to right about 100 times. And Europeans, that's of course very broadly talked and doesn't apply to each and every individual, but we tend to not really like too much risk. So it's really difficult in Europe to launch ahead with things, and that's why the hemp industry in Europe, I think, has very continuously, slowly built up, but there's not a real push through. It's because we're safe players. We like to, not go completely off into the gambling world with our ventures. That's what I love about America. when Americans want to do something, they go big. They don't care. It's like full risk, full on, and if it works, it's really great. But if it doesn't work, then oh well, then kind of swallow it and brush off the dirt from your pants, get back up, and do something else. It's as said, there's these culturally things that I think are very nice when they come to mix, and one of the things that I just think does not work too well with hemp now anymore, because we've really overcome the last years of myth tackling. There's a lot of myth within the hemp industry. Hemp can be made into 50,000 products. I don't think it's really necessary we talk about 50,000 products. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. Let's focus on the couple of few products hemp can really do well, but get them right. Get them really right, because that's one of the things. Too many people in hemp get completely frazzled, and I saw that a lot in Europe. They want to do paper, they want to do textiles, they want to do food, they want to do building, and probably another 500 things in between. And then at the end, they have to let it all go because they couldn't get a head start on not one single one of these topics. And I think, to really be transparent and thorough and professional about whatever you do, you really need to keep it together, focus on one thing and then go with that, and really fine-tune that to the point where we talked about phytoremediation earlier, where things like, oh, sorry, man, I just grew hemp for smokables and it happened to be on a completely contaminated ground. Well, this really shouldn't be happening. And these are things we need to just tackle before we go into the game. Education is certainly of highest value, highest needed, and education is also one of these things that I feel undergoes this cheerleading point all the time, because when people educate about hemp, they become so enthusiastic about the plan and so carried away that at the end they'll make really big promises on hemp can do anything, hemp can save the entire world, probably by the end of tomorrow night. I doubt that. It's a part of the puzzle.
Yeah, for sure. Everyone talks about the 50,000 uses of hemp, and you say we need to focus on just a few. Could you name like top 3? Maybe what should we be focusing on?
Okay, one thing that just popped up in my head because it fascinates me really to the moon and back, because I'm a passionate winter sports person. I love telemarking. One of my friends from the hemp industry made a ski from hemp, the grown ski. Happens to be a very passionate telemarker as well, so it happens to be a telemark ski, whereas a ski can be used for anything. It's the binding that you put on it. And alongside with that, another person in Tyrol has actually fabricated the world's first ski pole from hemp. And it's literally a whole hemp stem. It looks gorgeous and it's functional. And it's now going into a very small scale, but into a production with the first outdoor company. Now, of course, these are things that I personally burn for, and it's more where you say, that's like snazzy stuff from hemp. But I find that very exciting because it shows that hemp actually has the potential to even tap into these niche markets that so far have been carbon fiber, high intensity energy use, at the end a whole lot of material that we can't separate from one another anymore, which means we cannot recycle it. And that's what we need to move away from. And then, of course, one of the things that's highly spoken about is hemp building. If we talk about carbon sequestration, uptake of CO2, then building is going to be our way to go ahead. And on that account, I want to say something because it touched me so deeply. It was number one that Sergey from Ukraine yesterday made it to NoCo, and that he got the carbon sequestration award at the awards dinner, and he went on stage and he said, now we're going to have to build up Ukraine with hempcrete again. I'm sorry, I'm losing it a little bit because this was that was a huge message to the world, and it did not come out of this all hemp moment, but it's somebody who's literally put to ashes, a country that's been put to ashes right now, and somebody who really sees the potential in hemp to be bringing that nation back up. And I think, to me personally, in 20 years, I'll be thinking about Sergey going on that stage making that comment.
If there can be a silver lining for what's happening over there, maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a European, how do you feel about like what? That's right on in your continent. How?
Oof.
Maybe we shouldn't even go there to speculate
Well,
as to what the implications are.
I'm not going to speculate on a war. That's beyond my power to do, I think. I wish I was more empowered to do anything about it. I wish we all could be doing more about it. And it's unfortunately it's a very dire situation when you literally sit there and you sit right next to it and you have nothing else to do but opening your house, your door to people to lodge in. That's not really satisfying, and I will say that, and that's a very bitter statement, but Ukraine is currently not our only war we have in the world. We have an uncountable numbers of wars, and these are all our Western world's resource wars, and we don't like to see them. Now the Ukraine happens to be in the heart of Europe, happens to be right at our doorstep, and suddenly this war gets rated very differently than any of these other wars. I do not want to put any judgment or any balance on any of this, but I do want to say that this has made me very, very sad. It also forced me to rethink on many, many things, also on my own behavior, on my own use of materials and everything, on my own travel habits. I came over here on a plane. I'm wondering if our world will be the same in a couple of years. That's one of the things that's in my head, and I'm certainly realizing that it's not just to differentiate between wars according to the geography that they're in. I think we need to be treating them all the same, and we need to make sure that they stop. And that again brings me back to the message of this book. We all need to start with our own lifestyles. We need to debunk, because if we all buy a new cell phone every 5 years, these wars in Africa are surely not going to stop. And that was a very loose transition now, and I'm going to leave it at that, because that's probably enough politics.
Right. But you're right. I think what you're describing is the need for a paradigm shift in our own mindsets, like at the individual level, like the choices we make, what we buy, how we live.
Yeah.
And as a hemp storyteller myself, I think hemp it's not the only solution, but it's got to be part of it, I think. And, from my perspective, agriculture has to be part of it. It's not
absolutely
definitely necessarily hemp, but it's necessarily agriculture has to be part of our solution.
Diversity. I think diversity is going to be the answer to most of our problems. It's if we start looking for the one silver lining, it's not going to happen. We're just going to launch into the next problem because we're going to make the next crop a monoculture and then realize, oh, now we do need pesticides and herbicides again because all the magic of hemp is suddenly gone. I mean, too much of every... How do they say with plant medicine? It's the amount that makes the medicine. There's the dose. Sorry,
yeah.
If you take the right dose, it will do good. If you take too much, it will kill you. Poison, and it's the same for everything. And we need to keep that in mind. And we just need to make more mindful decisions on anything we do, whether we touch hemp or any other plant or any other. I will say something. Plastic. Everybody bashes on plastic now, but from my hemp experts that I interviewed for the book and also for the biocomposite chapter that I put together, all the research that I did for that, it showed very clearly that plastic has revolutionized our world. It has helped us cut down energy because we're not hauling glass containers, metal containers around. No, these things are lightly packed in plastic. If we were to treat plastic like we treat gold, it would not be swimming around in all of our world's oceans because nobody throws gold away. And I'm taking this as a quote from one of my experts here, from Jeremiah Dutton from Sweden, from the Swedish company Trifilon. And he explained it so well, and it really made me realize that most of our origins of problems in the world that have manifested in the world are really our perceptual problems. We need to treat the stuff the way it needs to be treated, and we need to put value. We need to stop putting value only at the monetary currency. We need to put the value back to nature. If we don't take nature as our most highest, I don't even want to say possession, because we do not possess Mother Earth.
It possesses us.
Exactly. Right? We're on a lease base on this world, and right now we're really pushing for this lease to be ended a bit earlier.
Yeah. I mean, it's very arrogant of humans to think that we're above nature and that we can control nature, and all of these fights we have are really comes down to that.
Which brings me to another thing. One of the chapters in this book on anthropocene, I was asked by a lot of people, why did you put the anthropocene in the hemp book? And I said, well, because most every second person who I talk to doesn't even know what the anthropocene is. The anthropocene is the era, the ecological time zone that we have created. As humans, we have put ourselves so high above nature that we started to influence the geological happenings in the
systems,
world. It's crazy. And it didn't dawn on me myself until I put that chapter together and had all the visuals and all the graphics illustrated and everything, where I said, Jesus Christ, we're insane. Right now the whole world points at Putin and says he's lost his mind. I think the fact is we've all lost our minds, because on a less destructive level than Putin, we are all doing the same. We're putting ourselves above everything, thinking that none of our concern, nature will play our way. And somehow it isn't, and the climate crisis is showing us on a daily basis that it isn't, and even that we don't recognize, we don't accept that this is happening. We're in complete denial. And this is really going to cost us our lives.
You talked about the indigenous cultures, and there's not many indigenous cultures really left in the populations, right? But they're the holders of the ancient knowledge.
Well, as Alicia Fall says so nicely, in our hearts and in our roots, we're all indigenous, because we've all come from Mother Earth, from the lands, and I love how she talks about these things, and she's really helped me get a complete new understanding, and she's also one of the experts on the expert interviews in the books. And apart from Alicia was the one to talk about the concept of these, making decisions for 7 generations ahead, which that got me thinking, like, have I ever made a decision for a fly? Usually a fly lives a day. My decisions are made now, and they're already irrelevant 3 hours later because something has changed. And it was for the paper chapter that I actually, in my research, came upon, and it was one of my Sami friends who educated me on that and said, are you aware that 21% of the global land surface belongs to indigenous, or is still governed by indigenous peoples, and 80% of our global biodiversity coincides with these 21% land, which means the biodiversity hubs are all found on indigenous lands, which means that's where our world still strives and is normal and intact and healthy, except these are becoming isolated islands, and not only do we need to guard them, but we need to open up and we need to really toss over our arrogancy and our entire imperialism and colonialism we've been practicing for centuries, because it is not helping to solve this crisis. If there's anybody who will be able to have and transmit the knowledge to mitigate the crisis, we can't solve it anymore at this point, I believe. We will have to turn to our indigenous brothers and sisters and really embrace what they are telling us, because they are not like us. We scream really loud to be heard, and indigenous people don't scream, just the opposite. The more important their message is, the more quiet they become. And that's something that's really, really difficult, I think, for our modern societies to understand and to listen to. And I don't want to be arrogant myself, because it's taken me 4 years to learn that. And I still have my moments when I struggle because I'm misunderstood again and mistaken a silent answer as either a no answer or a negative answer, whereas this was the wisdom given to me on a silver plate and I just didn't get it. So I think it's there's a lot of cultural things that we need to overcome, and certainly we need to stop thinking in races and colors and discriminative terms of anything. If we keep them up, no way we're going to get through this crisis.
But you're hopeful that we can.
I tend to be a really, really hopeless optimist, yes. I jokingly said at one point, I'll finish this hemp book and afterwards I'll write another book. It'll have 3 pages. A cover, a back, and 1 page in the middle that will just tell the world to just get off the planet. Get rid of yourself really quick, because that will solve all the problems most fastest. So that's my sarcastic answer to being an optimist. I don't know. It's a tough journey. I think as an optimist, you sit on a really high roller coaster. You have these days where you think, okay, we can do that, and the next day comes and you have another piece of research you opened up and you're just spending 2 hours crying on your desk because you really don't see any light at the end of the tunnel anymore. And I will say, I think with the work that I do, that you do, there's probably a lot of emotional states that the outside world doesn't see us go through. I'm not always laughing, and I'm not always very happy, and also not always very optimistic about where we're heading. But as long as there's a community, such as here at NoCo, that are all engaging in positive thinking and all engaging in trying to change the system, trying to find that reset button that will give us a new start and a more ecological way of thinking, I'm remaining hopeful.
Maren Krings, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It was a very interesting interview.
There you go. That's Maren Krings, the author of H is for Hemp. She is a climate impact storyteller, and she has just produced this big, beautiful book called H is for Hemp. And you can get yourself a copy. You can go to marenkrings.com. I will put a link for that on the show page for this episode. But please note that this printing was a limited collector's edition. There were only 700 copies of this book printed, but I do believe there are some available, and you should go get yourself one. You won't regret it. Okay, well, thank you for listening to this special episode of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast, these conversations from NoCo. I've got one more of these special NoCo conversations to share with you. The next one is with Joe Hickey. He's a Kentucky hemp pioneer. You might remember him from that documentary, Hempsters Plant the Seed, with Woody Harrelson, where Woody gets arrested for planting hemp in Kentucky. Yeah, Joe's got all kinds of great stories, and he shares a lot of them with me in this conversation. So stay tuned for that. Look for that in your feed or however you get your podcast. Anyway, my name is Eric Herlock. I'm the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Check us out online at lancasterfarming.com. And you're going to want to go to the show page to click that link so you can buy Maren's book. All right, what else? Just a reminder that the Pennsylvania Hemp Summit is coming up later this month. It's April 26th and 27th. In Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. You can go to pahempsummit.com to learn more. And a shout out to some of our ongoing sponsors, including IND Hemp, King's Agri Seeds, Impactful Ventures, and Amerishon Cast Hemp. All right, so that's it for me. Until next time, I will see you in the newspaper.
Industrial hemp.
This special edition of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2022 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, which is part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show is written and recorded, edited, and produced by Eric Herlock, and any music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.